So before we begin with today's guest speaker, I'm going to cover quickly just a few housekeeping items. You have been muted to cut down on background noise, and we encourage you to use the chat box throughout the session to ask questions or place any comments you have. Please be sure to send to all participants so that I, our guest presenter, and your colleagues can see any questions and information shared throughout the session. And just one more quick note about questions. We will have a dedicated Q&A at the end of the session, so I will be collecting comments and questions as they come in. So please feel free to drop any ideas or questions you have into the chat box as they come to you during the session, and I will relay them to Monica at the end. So I'm placing the closed captioning link in the chat box now. We will be recording the session today, and you'll be sent a copy of this recording once it's processed and uploaded to the NNLM YouTube channel. This webinar grants 1 MLA CE. To claim the CE, please fill out the survey that will pop up in your browser after you exit the webinar. If for some reason you don't see the survey when you leave, just send me an email and I can send you the direct link. And I will also be providing this link in the chat box closer to the end of our session today. So now that that is all out of the way, let me just say welcome. I'm so glad you could all join us today for the October installment of the Identifying and Combating Health Misinformation webinar series. This series is hosted by the NNLM Wikipedia Working Group and aims to discuss various aspects of online health misinformation, how to identify it, and how to help curb its spread. I also want to put an additional plug in today that if you are interested in Wikipedia, and if you are here, I would hope you all are at least to some extent, NNLM is currently in the middle of our fall Cite NLM Editathon on maternal and child health. There are events going on throughout the month, and we will be capping it off with a live 2-hour editing session in Zoom on October 29th, where you can chat and edit articles with NNLM staff and colleagues from around the country. So to learn more about that live editing event and about Cite NLM, you can visit our project page at nnlm.gov/wiki. Let me now introduce our guest speaker for today. Monica S. Jones, PhD, is an expert in digital cultural studies. She has edited Wikipedia since 2012 and leads Wikipedia training courses, workshops, and webinars for library staff, academics, and undergraduates. Monica has published popular press articles and book chapters about the benefits of engaging with Wikipedia for equity in information access and digital literacy skills. In 2017 to 2018, she was the OCLC Wikipedian in Residence, and you can learn more about Monica at monicasjones.com. So now let us please welcome Monica. I am going to hand over to her the controls, and then the floor will be hers.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Liz. And it is a pleasure to be with you all here and to work with NNLM on talking about health information and the important topic of how we can curb the spread of health misinformation online. So here is the agenda for today. I'm going to go over a little bit of health information online and how we can talk about it in relation to Wikipedia, how Wikipedia works, and then looking at how health and medical information on Wikipedia happens. And then we'll talk a little bit about controversies about Wikipedia and on Wikipedia and fringe theories, and then what's next. So there's a lot to cover. So I'm going to get started, but I just wanted to say, to echo Liz again, please do use the chat channel to share your ideas, and I have a few activities for us throughout my talk to invite your feedback. So I hope that you will all participate. I think it makes for a really lively experience together when we do so. So let's get started. First, as you know, as we're all here to talk about health information, I think it's worth stating how prevalent it is to use the internet, the commercial internet, to access health information in general. In 2013, so earlier in the decade, Pew Research found that 80% of the U.S. adults were using the internet, and nearly 60 were explicitly searching for health information online. So that works out to about 80% of U.S. adult internet users doing online searches. By 2018, that number had grown to nearly 90%, and the health searches have scaled up accordingly. So another statistic that we might just mention again is that 1 in 20 Google searches is on health-related topics. So we've got this situation where, as you know, a lot of people are using the commercial internet to find information. And there is the circulation of misinformation online. Misinformation isn't always black and white, and I've included a typology here that's created by Claire Vardel from FIRSTORAFT, which outlines all the various ways that mis and disinformation might be categorized. We may have satire or parody that's taken as fact and not recognized as satire or parody. And there can be, on the other end of the spectrum, explicit disinformation campaigns. And as we see the multiple meanings of viral happen, particularly in our pandemic situation with COVID-19, information can spread and change rapidly across the internet. And sometimes this questionable information is really obvious, but it can also be difficult to recognize and still reach many people. There are many examples, and I've included some examples of health misinformation here that have been shared on social networks and by text. And I just wanted to highlight that though we saw many examples, as you may know, of misinformation about COVID-19 and in the pandemic, some of this isn't new. In 2014, the bleach Ebola cure, quote unquote cure, was also a viral meme that was shared around about using bleach to cure Ebola. And this example, and I say that like very sarcastically, I hope you can catch, it includes information that's both correct and incorrect. So bleach, yes, is a strong disinfectant, but it is not totally harmless when you inject it. So there's an example there. And then on the right of this page is a copy paste of a health bulletin that erroneously claimed that keeping your throat moist could prevent COVID-19. So we know that these kinds of misinformations are circulating and being shared. And if you wanted to share any examples that you've found, I think all of us could cringe and also would be curious if you've seen these before. But we also know that Wikipedia is part of our internet industries, and which is also our topic for today. And so the question is, that I want us to discuss is, to what extent does these kinds of controversies, misinformations, do they end up on Wikipedia? And how reliable and authoritative is the biomedical information you encounter on the crowdsourced free encyclopedia? And I think it's important to recognize that Wikipedia is a part of internet industries, but also is quite different from other commercial proprietary companies and platforms. But all of our internet platforms fall under the same legal framework. And I bring this up as a kind of scholar because I think it's important to go back to understand how it is that platforms do and don't, are and aren't able to circulate information that differentiates them from other media, for example, newspapers or broadcast television. And the reason that platforms work the way that they do is in part due to the Communication Decency Act of 1996, and specifically Section 230. Much has been written about Section 230, and you may have come across it before, but I'll just highlight the 2 points that are made here that give platforms immunity from being sued, for example, for the content that's circulated on them. So that's number one. They're not treated as the publisher, but at the same time, they are allowed to restrict access. So they can make content choices as they wish. And so this is how we end up with situations where companies aren't considered authors of information, but they can make editorial choices about what happens on their platforms. And it all goes back to Section 230 of the CDA. So Wikipedia has developed a little bit differently than other proprietary companies. It started in 2001, so almost 20 years ago. And it was among many wikis at the time that were kind of blossoming up, but this one stayed in a couple years after Wikipedia began as a crowdsourced project to write an encyclopedia using MediaWiki software, which allowed for collaborative distributed content production by multiple users at the same time. The software was developed in the 90s by a computer programmer out of Portland named Ward Cunningham. So using MediaWiki to create a crowd-produced encyclopedia was kind of a fun, novel idea at the time that took off. The Wikimedia Foundation was started a couple years later to support the servers and to support programs around Wikipedia, but the Wikimedia Foundation does not participate in any editorial decisions about how Wikipedia works. It was and remains a community-based project that users who participate have decided that consensus is the way that the encyclopedia will be governed, and have created a number of mechanisms to update this very large online encyclopedia that's free and open for anyone to use. And as an encyclopedia, users decided it will be a tertiary reference focused on verifiability of sources. It does not aim to be the truth or show the truth, but to show verifiability of facts. And given the distributed nature of the wiki, it's being continuously reviewed and updated all the time. So it's a growing and changing and morphing encyclopedia. It's in over 200 languages. Each language is different. And English Wikipedia is by far the most ubiquitous resource that we have today. It is, as I said, ubiquitous. English Wikipedia is extremely popular. It's the 8th most visited website in the US, and it's the only nonprofit platform in the top 100 visited platforms in the US. There's about 500 million visitors per month to the Wikipedia pages, which makes up about 21% of daily internet traffic, over 2 million page views per day. And importantly, Wikipedia, because it's free, and by free, I mean the licensing for the content and the metadata makes it reusable by other organizations. Wikipedia's metadata has formed a crucial part of Google's KnowledgeGram, which is how it developed its kind of web of knowledge to run its searches. It also forms the backbone of info boxes that may show up in a Bing or Google search if you want info about something. And as well, it informs answers to home robots. So if you were to ask your Google Home or Alexa a question, often, not always, but often Wikipedia is used to answer those questions. So it's very ubiquitous. And as I said, it's a wiki. So the back screen here shows the look of the media wiki. It's a modified HTML, which can confuse those of us who know HTML and CSS because it's not exactly the same, but it's close. And so you would, there's also a visual editor that if you have or will edit Wikipedia, that's slightly easier to use. It's a WYSIWYG editor. But all authorship on Wikipedia as a wiki makes it collaborative. So there's no one author of an article. And when you contribute to Wikipedia, you're acknowledging, and anyone who contributes to Wikipedia is acknowledging that this content has become accessible and reusable by others, by Google, and so you might find mirror sites of Wikipedia as well, and content that's borrowed and adapted and copied from there. A huge benefit for information literacy is the incredible version control. And if you're an editor and you make mistakes, there's always a copy saved. You can't really break Wikipedia, and that's thanks to the huge servers that the Wikimedia Foundation maintains. One of them is in Texas, there's one in Amsterdam, and they keep all of the versions of Wikipedia up to date and accessible. And again, it's open access and open source. So who has been part of this volunteer community that's participated in the editing and the development of this project? This is a photo here from a wiki conference that took place in 2015. And this is some of the English language editors. But as I said, there's editors all over the world for the many Wikipedias in other languages. And each community has decided how the encyclopedia will work. Most follow very similar guidelines around, free and open and policies, but again, they all have their own nuances. The English Wikipedia has developed a quite rigorous criteria for how ideally articles should be developed. And these are the kind of cornerstone content policies for articles. They should have a neutral point of view. They should not include any original research. So this isn't a place to share your ideas about things or spread hearsay or so on. And everything that's in there should be verifiable. That means you should be able to trace it back to a citation of a reliable source. Reliable sources on Wikipedia are defined often as tertiary sources, so university-level textbooks or books published by respected publishing houses that have mastheads, that do fact-checking, that kind of are places where rigor has been established. For some articles and topics, magazines are acceptable and mainstream newspapers are acceptable sources, and journals as well, academic journals are acceptable sources as well. So this is for the project as a whole, and there are specific guidelines for medical content. But before I jump into that, I want to pause for a minute and invite you to share what your experience has been with Wikipedia in chat. So if you've edited before, we'd love to hear that. If you use it for information literacy training, if you are a Wikipedia reader, if you're enrolled in the class that Liz explained NNLM is running, we'd love to hear that as well. So thank you for coming to join and share. So Annette says they use it to find sources. Others have edited. Aaron has edited, Dara, Rachel. Carrie says they use it to find basic general information, and has found it often has accurate information. And a couple are enrolled in the classes. Liz has done topics related to Southeastern tribal affairs, so health topics are new. Awesome. Well, it's really great to see all of your comments. I see Marie says it's very robust. And others have, Ada has done it to understand reference questions. So we're really getting a pretty nice range of readers and editors. I did see one question at the top, which asked how editors are evaluated on their credentials. You don't need any credentials to edit Wikipedia. No one will ask you, you know, are you qualified to write about health information? This can be a benefit or a drawback. And what we've seen is, I think Catherine Marr, who's the executive director of the Wikimedia Foundation, shared a comment, which is that in theory, Wikipedia would never work, but in practice, it has. So it's kind of this like project that defies sense. How is it that something that can be edited by anybody has turned out to be pretty robust? And as Liz says, you know, it's very transparent too. So it's a great tool to think about how authority is constructed and contextual, and also how authority in our online information system is being recreated. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk about health and medical information on Wikipedia. And then I'm happy to talk more of your questions at the end. So health and medical information is pretty widely covered in Wikipedia. There's over 200,000 articles in 281 languages, so most language groups have health and medical information. It gets a lot of page views. People are using it. There's been research that's been done on students using Wikipedia. Many students access Wikipedia as well as doctors. A study came out in 2014 that showed that more than 60% of doctors looked at Wikipedia during their jobs. And when Wikipedians realized how often Wikipedia was being used, a kind of task force was formed called the Wiki Project Medicine to ensure that all biomedical information was based on reliable third-party published secondary sources and accurately reflects current knowledge in the field. So the guideline was developed and has a name called, the WPMEDRS. But before I get there, I have another interactivity in here for you, which is, as you know, Wikipedia's articles are not meant to provide medical advice, and this is according to Wikipedians. Nevertheless, they are widely used. So comparing Wikipedia to other online social platforms, Google searches, Facebook, wherever else you might go in the online information ecosystem, how reliable do you consider health information? So, and again, I'm asking you to kind of compare what's available in the free commercial searches. Obviously, we know that you can find information in other online services that libraries host, as well as a place like NNLM has many resources, but I'm seeing many of you are saying, you know, probably more reliable than copy-paste posts. And this is indeed, I think, where we can get into the nuances of how community moderation works. So community moderation on other social media platforms, again, is up to the platform for how they want to implement it, but many have not implemented much or are only very recently implementing any community moderation. Wikipedia, on the other hand, has had very robust rules about what kinds of information should be used in articles and how to deal with that information. So the role that, and thank you all for sharing your perceptions of health information on Wikipedia. And I do see a skeptic. I don't use social media for health information. I don't use Wikipedia for health information. Very, very wise to be skeptical. And I think your skepticism is met by editors who participate actively, many librarians who participate in Wikipedia who are skeptical and have incorporated that skepticism into how the information is created and updated in Wikipedia. So the guidelines that are used to source all medical articles, including pseudoscientific articles, is called MEDRS, the Medical Reliable Source Guidelines. And these are very specific. So in Wikipedia articles, you can use literature reviews from reputable peer-reviewed journals. You can use textbooks by experts and medical guidelines by expert bodies. And I've seen some of you say that you've also looked to these expert bodies as places for reliable, authoritative sources of information. What's not allowed? Opinion pieces, pop culture articles, newspaper or magazine write-ups of a scientific study, and importantly, a single peer-reviewed study, which may be published in a scientific journal. Science works through a long process, as you well know. So one study, scientists don't necessarily take that study as the end of the conversation about the topic, but it's the beginning. It should be refuted. It should be trialed again. So one study is not a legitimate, authoritative source for a claim about anything that someone might use to make decisions about their bodies or health treatment. So now that you've got those guidelines in mind, I've got a little pop quiz for you. I sound like such a nerdy teacher here. So I'm going to read out loud these options, and I'm asking you to choose. Pardon me, the directions are at the top. So which of these 4 articles meet the MEDRS guidelines? And so I'll read them out loud to you. At the top, we have an article from the Cochrane database of systemic reviews titled Blood Pressure Targets for Hypertension in Older Adults, published in August 2017. B, we have the High Blood Pressure Fact Sheet, published by the CDC in 2015. We have C, an article from Health Daily News via WebMD, Most Popular Blood Pressure Drugs Might Not Be the Best. And then we have D, an article from The Lancet called Comprehensive Comparative Effectiveness and Safety of Online Antihypertensive Drug Classes, a Systemic Multinational Large-Scale Analysis. So I'm seeing a lot of answers come in. I'm so glad that most of you are not putting C. That's not correct. Health Daily News articles are generally not considered to be authoritative sources. They're not these, I'm going to go back to the slide, they're not a lit review source, so that's a no-no there. Those of you who said A and B, those are correct, and those are used in the article on hypertension, which is a good article on Wikipedia. Now, D is a tricky one. The Lancet is a very prestigious and respected journal, but it's a single study. It's a systemic multinational large-scale analysis that has a big population that was being considered, but it's only one study. So according to Wikipedia, Wikipedia editors, this is considered a primary source because the authors of the article are the ones who ran the study. I hope this helps you kind of understand how editors are sussing out information that's included on Wikipedia. And I think when I've learned about this criteria, it's helped a lot to kind of get a sense. So Hannah asks, what counts as a single study? When the article is written by the scientists who ran the study, it's considered a primary source. It's not. Yeah, you need a review article that would analyze other studies that were replicating the same question. And I'll note to you that the Robert Pryditt Health Daily News piece is actually summarizing the results of the Shooter Lancet primary source article. But when we take primary sources, like studies that are written up by the scientists who ran them, this is where information has gotten into hot water. So you may remember a very famous, or maybe I should say infamous case of this is the Wakefield primary study on autism and vaccines that was also published, I believe it was in the Lancet in the 90s. And that was a primary source article. So as we know, science works by people publishing their studies, and then they're kind of evaluated at a meta scale. But if primary source studies are considered to be the end of science, then for end users, that can be a problem. So the editors who have participated in the Wiki Project Task Force on medicine on Wikipedia, it was spearheaded by an editor who is a physician himself, or who's a doctor, and as well as other medical professionals who are involved in the editing community. It's a small group. I think there's around 200 members and a smaller number of very active editors over the years, but it's gotten a lot of attention because editors realize that though articles are not meant to provide medical advice, people are using online sources to get information. So the aim is to create the highest level of benchmark. You can go to Wikipedia and look and see all of the recent changes if you just look on the left hand of the bar, and you'll see many reversions are taking place. So editors will patrol or watch pages that are important to them and will be reverting information that doesn't meet the criteria. Which leads me to, now I want to kind of guide you in a couple of tips and tricks on how you can evaluate information that you might find on Wikipedia, knowing that these guidelines are developed as in a way as aspirations. This is what the editorial community wants Wikipedia to be, but they don't always, not all articles will meet the aspirational criteria. So this is the aim. So as you go in to evaluate, you're looking for articles that have a neutral point of view and don't weigh one part or topic over another. Nothing's given undue weight. That doesn't reflect mainstream scientific consensus for biomedical information. And in general, articles should not give undue weight to one point of view or another. So you'll find that on Wikipedia, articles generally aren't created about a topic or a subject who has quote unquote like 15 minutes of fame. That would be the event that's notable, not the person. And the person would be notable according to Wikipedia if independent sources that are independent from the person over a sustained period of time, and usually that's years, have objectively written about that person. That would be Wikipedia's notability criteria. So you're kind of looking for that neutral point of view to be upheld. You can also look to see if editors have given Wikipedia a grade. Different wiki projects, I mentioned to you Wiki Project Medicine, there's other wiki projects as well, will evaluate articles to see, you know, how developed are they? Do we need to work on this one because it's getting a lot of page views, but it's really in a starter article state, or, you know, and how well has it been done? And for some articles, there's an actual peer review process where editors will nominate an article, and editors will review it and critique it depending on how it meets the criteria and follows the manual of style for Wikipedia. And then you want to look to see that claims are cited using verifiable secondary sources. Verifiable does not mean online. There are many, as you know, many verifiable sources, secondary sources that are offline. And so, you know, books and reference books are legitimate and important references to have, but they should be able to trace them. And then, of course, when appropriate, you want those sources to meet MEDRS. So let's look at an article together. And I'm seeing some questions in chat. I'll make sure I get to that in a second. So we're looking at the article for influenza. And there's a couple of things that you can see about this article. First, we're on the article page. So this is how I've circled that in red at the top. On the right-hand side, I've circled a star and a lock sign. So the star means that it's a featured article. That's Wikipedia's highest article class. That means it's gone through peer review. And the lock means that editors who are editing from an IP address and any editor that has not participated in Wikipedia projects for more than 4 days and made more than 10 edits will be technically unable to edit this article. So I'm not logged in to my Wikipedia account when I took this screenshot. So you can see at the top, it says read, view source, and view history. I'm technically not able to press the edit button on this page because I am not an auto-confirmed editor as a logged out user. So we can see here already that this page has been under development for some time, and it's going to be stable in that you're not going to see just anybody going in and adding changes. If we move over to the talk page, one of the things I like to encourage people to do is to look at when was an article promoted to a featured article. And this one was promoted in 2006. So that was some years ago, a previous version of it. So sometimes it's important to see how much has changed in the article since 2006. And you can look at the revision history, and you can even look at page statistics, and there's bar graphs, nice graphs where you can look and see how much content was added or changed. So I've included an arrow here that shows the state of the article when it was promoted to featured class, and actually quite a bit has changed since 2006. And that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. For one, featured articles are often difficult to change because those who promoted the article to featured status will watch the page to make sure that additions made don't make the quality go down. But as well, for medical articles, scientific expertise changes over time slowly. Science works slowly, but it does change over time. And the goal of Wikipedia editors is to have the citations to articles be within the last 5 years. So the articles should be updated and accurate. Now, sometimes that can slip. It might be a textbook that was 7 years ago. You might find older articles in there, but editors are working to maintain the quality of an article. This has a big line up there that you might want to look at what was added and then taken away there. But in general, you can see some stability over time. So you can look to talk to kind of work backwards to see, or to revision history to see how an article has changed over time. And then you'll want to just do a brief reference check. So what's the most common reference that's used? That will be noted by the number of footnotes that you have here. So reference number 1 has, I don't know, 15 little footnotes. That's how often it's used. And this is to a publication by the World Health Organization. So this would be, again, that tertiary source by an expert body. And it was published within the last 5 years, published in 2019, or 2019. So again, you're looking for those reputable meta studies in peer-reviewed publications or by expert bodies. And you can see what's used the most and what's used not, even without reading the article, by looking to see which reference, by looking to see those footnotes. And you want to look to see if things are verifiable, and you may just want to wander over to those hyperlinks as well if you're looking for specific information. But this can give you a sense that the article is pretty strong. For the influenza article, there's 294 references with additional recommendations and links as well. So this is a fairly robust article that summarizes the main ideas in the field. We can look at another article that's of note for our current pandemic. This is the coronavirus article about the group of articles, not about the COVID-19 disease of 2019 or the pandemic, but there are links to go there if that's what you're looking for. This article is locked in a different way. It says E on there. That means that editors who have made any less than 500 edits are not allowed to edit the article. And the reason this has been locked is because of disruptive editing, where editors have gone in and tried to add information that does not meet MEDRS. And so it's been locked to only the editors who have achieved kind of the highest level of trust in the community. Again, we had that question earlier, which was, do you need to show your credentials on Wikipedia? Credentialing has developed in a very different way on this encyclopedia, which is that you prove yourself through how you contribute to the community. Editors can be blocked if they don't seem to be working in the spirit of the editing community. There's an arbitration committee that will oversee editing, and if a username of an editor appears to be engaging in disruptive, trolling, or bad behavior, they can be blocked or get a notification if they're not working in the best interest of the community. So it's difficult to get 500 edits. So extended lock means that likely only those who have really proven themselves in the community are able to edit this article. I'm seeing a couple of questions come in, and I'll make sure that I look to those in a minute. Next, I wanted to give you what you can do when you look at view history. So this is another part of the page. So this is the view history of that same coronavirus article. And we're looking here, an editor made a contribution to the page with one citation, but it looks like they used, knowingly or not knowingly, perhaps, what's called a predatory source, which is not considered a reputable publication for biomedical information. Predatory publishing is one of the blacklisted sources. There's over 2,000 blacklisted websites and sources on Wikipedia. So these are pages, often they're called a spam list, so they're spammed, but there's also sources that are simply not considered to be credible enough to allow anybody to add to them. There is a lot of gray area as well, so you'll see editors debate about, does this source meet our criteria for reliable sources, but 2,000 of them are simply technically impossible to add. Then there is some gray area where you get a source like this one that was added, and then another user reverted it, saying this is a predatory source, and that takes a judgment call on the part of the editor. That wasn't automatically blacklisted. And I think that's in part because we can see the government-run database called ERIC will republish some information that are by what we might consider predatory sources. So there is gray area. We have to editors make judgment calls about what a source is and where it comes from. But you can look here and see, as an example, that this is Wikipedians doing what I would call kind of police work, where they're maintaining an article quality by deleting information that's added. And often this kind of thing will happen within minutes of an article being added, but there may be a time when you get onto a page and that information is on there and another editor hasn't deleted it yet. So pages are changing all the time, and it's something to be aware of. I wanted to pause for a minute to answer some questions just right now, because it looks like questions are coming up about sources. Liz, was there any question that you saw was something that I could attend to before I move on to the next topic?
There was one question. Would an article that appears in an online-only journal that is not a primary source, so it is a secondary source, still be considered a credible source? And I think the question is it if it's online-only journal? I think
that's okay. Online-only can have mastheads. They have fact-checking. Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Hannah, for noting that I spelled controversies wrong. I thought I caught all my typos, but that's a controversial statement to make. Thank you for the question. And as well, yes, I'm happy to share the slides, and I will fix the misspelling before I share them with Liz, and I think she can put them up on the site where you got the general information about our event today. So next, I want to talk a little bit about controversies and fringe theories. And this would be about controversies that are external to Wikipedia, and then also controversies about Wikipedia in general. So articles may include debunked misinformation when secondary sources have covered that topic. So to circle back to that piece of misinformation that circulated about bleach in the Ebola times, and then now with the coronavirus pandemic, we've seen these conversations about quote unquote bleach cures go around, and the article about bleach does include a section on that debunked misinformation. So it includes information and also links to longer articles about, for example, this product called the Miracle Mineral Supplement, which has its own page because it's been covered by secondary sources in mainstream media. It is not a, it's a product, so only its features as a product have been covered. It's not covered as like biomedical fact. And you can see that as well. I don't have a screenshot here of it, but in other articles as well. Then we have a controversy about Wikipedia, which is that it has been a site for circular reporting. As I mentioned earlier, Wikipedia's content is free to use and free to share. So that means that you can copy something from Wikipedia and you're not breaking copyright. It's openly shareable, legally shareable to use, but things should be cited, of course. So other websites have used information from Wikipedia, and this can create a moment of ambiguity. A couple of years ago, the Wiki Project Medicine pointed to instances of circular reporting on Wikipedia. And I pulled up here one of those instances, which was that there was a claim made about protamine sulfate on Wikipedia in its history section, but nevertheless on Wikipedia, that did not have a citation. That claim was reproduced in the description in DrugBank, which is a repository of information. And then that DrugBank page was used as the citation for the claim made on Wikipedia. Now, it takes a real sleuth with some time on their hands to trace back the version history of these pages, and you can use the Wayback Machine for the DrugBank page, and then you can use view history for the Wikipedia page to see which came first. Was this a case of circular reporting, where something was put into Wikipedia without any verifiable citation and then copied over to DrugBank? And the editors who were on this case seem to think that it was the case, and so that has been deleted, and they notified DrugBank that that was inaccurate information. DrugBank doesn't necessarily meet MEDRS, but when it's in a history section, it's not necessarily there to make medical claims. So there's a lot of nuance in when MEDRS needs to be met and not. But generally, if you would use the information to make a decision about your health, or if a medical doctor would use the information to make a decision about health, then that's when it should meet MEDRS. But in a history section or in a cultural section or social implication section, those can use just the general reliable source guidelines for information. So it's something to be aware of. There aren't a ton of reported cases on circular reporting, but certainly it has happened in the past and could happen. And that's where that transparency of Wikipedia becomes very valuable. And then Wikipedians have a policy, or guidelines, I should say, guidelines, excuse me, on fringe theories. And these are theories that are ideas that are not broadly supported by scholarship in the field. So the idea is to maintain a neutral point of view in an article as a whole. Nothing should be given undue weight about a mainstream idea. What can happen is if that idea has been covered broadly by other reliable sources, then it may merit having its own page about it. But that minority viewpoint shouldn't be given a lot of attention in the main article. And so an example of this would be in the just a very broad example, would be in the article on astronomy. The history section cites astrology and the process of using, for example, celestial bodies' movements to make predictions about the future as a important part of the history of astronomy as it's done today. But it's part of that history section, and it's not the main core of the article. An example of a fringe theory that's not given any attention on the main page is the Wikipedia article on vaccinations. So you can go to the page on vaccines, and you won't find any mention of vaccine hesitancy or vaccine anti-vaccination proponents, but you will find a different separate page called vaccine hesitancy, which covers that topic and how it's been covered in reliable sources that describes it as almost a conspiracy theory or a way that's not supported by scientific evidence. Fringe theories are constantly being debated now, particularly when adding to articles. And so just as a kind of, if you were feeling nerdy and wanted to learn more, you can go to the Fringe Theories notice board, which I included the hyperlink to on this slide, to just see what Wikipedians are talking about and what's come up. And so just to summarize, here are some things that you can remember when you're evaluating articles on Wikipedia. Remember that the MEDRS content standards are there and they should be upheld. So if you're feeling like you see something that doesn't look like it meets the content standards, you can edit the page if it's not locked, or it's a good kind of invitation to join the upcoming NNLM edit-a-thon on maternal and women's health and learn more about how to participate. And then you can use the signs and signals of the page to make your evaluations. You can be wary of citations that credit Wikipedia without giving context. Wikipedians say don't cite Wikipedia, but use Wikipedia thoughtfully. Participate in the project, but don't cite Wikipedia. There are examples of health science journals that uncritically cite Wikipedia, and that's something to be aware of. Be aware that this is a collaborative community that shares authorship. So it's not one author who's writing articles, but it's a consensus-based community that works together over time to make changes. And Wikipedia is always changing, so it can be elucidating to look behind the scenes to see how things work. And it's a great opportunity to teach those tough digital and information literacy skills with a project that's constantly evolving. So it's a great site to help you and your patrons think about, what do I need to know about how authority is contextual and created, and how can Wikipedia help me teach those critical thinking skills. And what's next is where you can go with Wikipedia. You can continue to use your evaluation skills, and then you can participate in editing. For those of you who are enrolled in the course, you'll be editing, I believe, quite soon in adding a citation. And then NNLM and Liz can give you more information about how to participate in the NNLM edit-a-thon that's happening. And so now I'll pause here to say, any questions? And it looks like a lot of information has come in on the chat channel. Oh, and I see I'm joined today by another Wikipedian, Lane Raspberry, who's here. Hi, Lane. Thanks for being here. Lane is a longtime Wikipedian and a participant and advocate for credible and reliable health information on Wikipedia, and is a great person to have in our chat. So it looks like he's answered some questions as well in chat. Liz, if you could surface what maybe seem to be any important questions that I can tend to in the last few minutes of our time together.
Yeah, so one came in about fringe theories that turn out to be correct in the end. So one example was the idea that mitochondria were originally free-living bacteria. This was first fringe, turned out to be correct, but it took a long time for science to support it. So what happens, I mean, I guess the question would be what happens when fringe theories turn out to be fact? What is the process for that on Wikipedia?
Yeah, well, editors would change it. I mean, I think things are changing all the time, and this is a great kind of site to see how that happens. We, as a scientific community and as a general humanity, like what we value and how we decide what is legitimate and through which processes has changed. You can see that as well with, I think, the example of Pluto being changed in designation to a different kind of planetary body. And you can look at the history of that Wikipedia page to see early in the 2000s, it was called a planet, and today it's not called that anymore. And so that view history is incredibly useful for seeing as well just how what we decide to record and document and change does change over time, and how people come to those decisions to do that.
Let's see. There was just a question, I think, just confirming that Wikipedia is Creative Commons, so it is open to use and share.
Yes, yes, it is.
Let's see. In terms of citing biomed sources, what about a literature review you might find in PubMed, but it is written by one author in maybe a not-so-well journal? Is it okay to cite? And I think this kind of gets into your use your own judgment process, but I'd like to hear from you.
Great, because this is not an original study, but it's a survey. So it's evaluating what's already been said, and it's not original research by that author. So that, I mean, without getting into the nitty-gritty, and I'm also not a regular biomedical health information editor, but my sense would be that that sounds like it meets MEDRS. Yeah, a literature review, a survey, a meta review. Yeah. Thank you for all of your attention on these, the nitty-gritty of citations. I think this level of attention to what, how information is gathered and determined is something that all aspects of our internet ecosystem could benefit from. So I'm really glad that you've turned your attention to how Wikipedia works, because I think you may have seen over the course of our time together that it is quite different from how information is generated and shared in other spaces. So I'm really glad that you could be here today. Thanks, everyone. And again, thanks for pointing out my typos in my presentation. I'll fix them. My weak spot. That's why I love Wikipedia. People will always go in and fix your typos for you. Do contribute. Follow up with Liz on how to get involved in NNLM's editathons. And I'm really glad to have you today. I'll share back the slides. And thanks again for being here.
Yep, I'm going to put the evaluation link in the chat box once again. Okay. It's kind of getting filled. I know it got pushed up from all the end of presentation. And I'll just keep posting it.
Awesome.
And that should also pop up in your browser when it comes out. And if you somehow miss it at all, I will also be sending the link to everyone when I send notification that the recording is available. And also at that time, I will share Monica's slides as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for organizing this series, Liz, and for all you and NNLM are doing. It's really great and much needed. So thank you all, and take care, everyone. Thank you. I think, are we at the end of the hour, it looks like?
Yeah, we are just at the top of the hour, and I know everyone has many Zoom meetings.
Yes. Oh, here's my final slide. So if you would like to reach out to me, this is my contact information. So, and I'd, of course, be happy to hear from you. You can find me on Wikipedia, on my website, by email. And thank you all so much.
And I know I can stay on for a few more minutes just in case any other questions come in. And if anyone has specific questions about Cite NLM, and joining us on October 29th. When is the Wikipedia Editathon? So our all-day Editathon is on Thursday, October 29th, so just about 2 weeks now. And we are going to be having a live session where you can come hang out with all the NNLM staff. Oh, how do we sign up? Perfect. Let me grab it. I should have been more prepared. I should have known. And I spelled edit wrong. But there is the link to signing up for our virtual editathon. You can also visit nnlm.gov/wiki, and that will kind of give a broader overview of our project. And if you're interested in hosting your own editathons, there will be information on that there. Erin says, wear a costume. Yes, wear a costume to the editathon. Well, I haven't seen any other questions come in. If you have any, feel free to email me or Monica directly, and we can get back to you. Unless you have anything else, Monica, thank you for your time, and I am going to end this session and end the room.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot for being here and all of your critical questions. I appreciate it. It's great to have your attention for an hour. What an honor. And thank you, Liz, for having me today.